Hello guys, welcome back to Amstein TV. It's yet another video and we are going to be discussing about previous video that we have posted for some time now, and we have gotten so many feedback. We are here today to clarify some doubt and answer some questions that were asked during that video. And what is that video all about? It is all about why so many Africans Americans have Nigerian ancestry. It's very important as we have it all on our show. That is the video, as you can see, why so many Africans Americans have Nigerian ancestry. So now we are going to first look at how this issue all started to this point in time. And from there, we are going to look at some of the points of views given by different personalities from different parts of the world as this topic is concerned. And if you are there watching, you can as well drop your own points of view in the comment section. Let's see what it looks like. Before we start this journey, we are going to talk a little bit about slavery and slave trade in Africa. When we talk about slavery and slave trade, we all know it was some sort of a migration process, which was how we are going to explain in this video. So just stay tuned and let's see what it was all about. As we can say, slavery in African history is a systematic and imperative history of slavery in Africa from its earliest manifestation through to the early 20th century. When slavery in most parts of the continent had ceased to exist, it reconstructs the processes that led to the consolidation of slavery with the broader goal of understanding as best we can. So the live experience and the life experience of slaves throughout the book, we integrate an analysis of the personal and relational aspect of slavery between masters and the slave. So into a broader examination of slavery as an institution, we focus on especially on the way slavery emerged and changed over time as an institution. So about Africa, as it have often made the study of slavery difficult, in particular imagination, the African past before 20th century is often portrayed as a fundamentally rural, isolated, unspoiled, simple, and egalitarian facet. Slavery was real, as we can see, why slaves were not exploited as slaves, but rather became part of the African families. In other cases, Africa is portrayed as little more than the home to unknowable savage tribes, gleefully waging war only to sacrifice or sell their victims. So, an important purpose of slavery in African history is to present Africa, Africans, and slavery in a more realistic and accurate way. By so doing, African was historically diverse indeed. Africans would not have though of thought of themselves as African until quite recently. Before that wasn't possible. That is before the 20th century. The most important local allegiances were to kingship groups, religious orders, occupational groups, villages, cities, or state, among many other possibilities. So Africans created cities, armies, politics, and religions over the courses of the centuries. Although African economies are commonly portrayed as subsistence oriented or fundamentally concerned with the redistribution of goods and resources over time as part of the continent were increasingly oriented toward production and market exchange. People in some regions use currencies in the form of cowries, shares. For example, while groups of merchants sought actively to profit via the exchange of goods, we also saw it in that manner. Having gotten a vivid, clear idea about what slavery and slave trade was all about in Africa, we take you straight to the real questions why so many Africans Americans have Nigerian ancestry. Before coming back to look at the commentaries from the previous video, both positive and negative. Now, why so many Africans Americans have Nigerian ancestry? We got our information, our research from a bias and a base relief of shackle enslaved people and the wall of the Siriki Abbas Slave Museum in Badagry, Lagos, Nigeria. During the period of transatlantic slave trade, more than 12.5 million enslaved persons were shipped from Africa to the Americas, with about 3.5 millions of them from Nigeria. So if we have a bigger question today, why majority of the Africans Americans do find their ancestry route towards Nigeria, this is the answers we are giving it to you. Today, there are communities of people with Nigerian ancestry, mostly in Brazil, Cuba, and Jamaica, who have retained some sort of their ancestral belief and traditions. We also have people who have testified that after carrying out their DNA tests from different sources, for example, like 23andMe, they have testified with the percentages of their DNA result being from Nigeria. That is a clear proof that we have gotten enough result from our videos confirming the idea to be true. Why some, I don't know what they think happens to debunk the fact that it is not true. We are going to see it after the vivid explanation of the clear facts. By so doing, in the largest DNA study of people of Africa ancestry in the Americas, researchers found an overrepresentations of Nigerian genetic ancestry in the United States and Latin American compared to the proportion of enslaved people shipped to these places from regions within modern day Nigeria. It's really a clear fact to indicate that why the finds from the genetic study are largely supported by established narratives and historic records of the transatlantic slave trade. There were also inconsistencies in the research and in the movement as well. The researchers put forward a few and a new narrative explaining the variations in African ancestry in the Americas and how these variations were shaped by the transatlantic and later intra-American slave trade whose impact was only recently understood. So the study, which involved the DNA of 50,281 people of African descent in the United States, Latin America, and Western Europe, was carried out by the Consumer Genetics Company. That is 23andMe. The genetic data was analyzed against historical records of over 36,000 transatlantic slave trade voyages that happened between 1492 and the early 19th century. All that done, it's gearing toward why these happenings took place. We keep on moving as we see the overrepresentation of Nigerian ancestry is said to be a result of intra-American slave trade between the British Caribbean and mainland Americas. So, previously, genetic studies have shown that African Americans in the United States have more African ancestry from populations that live near present day Nigeria than from populations that live elsewhere in the Atlantic Africa, Western and West Central Africa, all around. And we have seen different parts of Africa, as we are going to be seeing from the feedback given by people whom this video have concerned, and they have given a vivid, clear explanation of what happened. We have gotten a DNA result from Congo, other part of Central Africa, that is showing the that some African Americans are tracing their DNA through those nations. So now this is what we call, and we have it in agreement. It was shown in this study Nigeria as the most common ancestry within the US, the French Caribbean, and the British Caribbean. This is despite nearly half of the slaves who landed in the United States coming from Senegambia, that is Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and West Central Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. A considerable number of the remaining half had their origins in Ghana as well as Ivorian Coast. That is the Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire of today. So the overrepresentation of Nigeria ancestry reported was found to be result of the later intra-American slave trade between the British Caribbean and the mainland Americas. The intra-American trade, which was an intercolonial trade involving over 11,000 slave voyages within the Americas, stretched as far as Boston to Buenos Aires and also Atlantic, the Pacific littorals. So the intra-American trade record show that while the transatlantic voyages were going on, slave traders transferred nearly 500,000 slaves throughout the Americas, with most intra-American voyages originating in the Caribbean, as the research shows. And we have some vivid explanation with some examples showing site and places where slaves were shipped and gathered for department and for departure. And we can see from the traces of research, Cape Coast Castle and the Gulf of Guinea is one of such places in Cape Coast, Ghana, where enslaved people from across Africa were traded. That was some sort of a market as where slaves were being traded to be taken to the Americas. We can also see some facts. Though the British outlawed the slave trade in 1807 and started intercepting slave ships, the intra-American slave trade continued. The intra-American slave trade voyages on record sailed until the 1840s, as there was the slave trade continued in the US and between Spanish Caribbean colonies. The researchers also reported Senegambia underrepresentation in the Americas, such as in northern South America and Central America, despite being the source of nearly half of the enslaved persons who landed at ports in the areas. So Senegambia has an underrepresentation as compared to Nigeria. That is why we don't have so many witnesses coming to testify they are from this Senegambian countries, but we have so many who are even trying to land in Nigeria and see what it looks like. I'm going to share their various comments with you to know what I'm talking about. But let us round up with the main facts and give you the better understanding of why it is so. As it is now, it was presumed to have resulted in reduced African ancestry in the population. A presumed higher mortality rate in the Americas among enslaved persons from Senegambia was also given a possible reason. Also in the study, the United States and the British Caribbean were found to have the highest African ancestry in the Americas. Previous genetic studies have also reported a lower proportion of Latin Americans with African roots compared to the proportion of African Americans in the United States. This is despite a historical record shows that over two-thirds of enslaved people who arrived in the Americas landed in Latin America, with less than 5% landing in mainland North America itself. This low representation was presumed to also be due to high mortality among enslaved people in Latin America and a high rate of integration between them and Native Americans, resulting in reduced African ancestry in the population. As we have rightly seen from this angle, we have all the details being broadcasted with it coming from the right source and the right research. You have all the right and you are free to keep your comment coming as others so that we can get to know more insight as we have seen it from others concerning this video. It will be a pleasure to have them on the comment section as it's coming all the way so that we can get to have a full knowledge of what we are dealing with in this topic. It's really a great show, and we are hoping to see more interest coming as we move on to discover many of them. So now that is not all, as we see another researcher proving to be on with some facts concerning the exploit for Africa. But that will not come now because we have other issues to look into, and we are going to look about the ancestry right, how you get to know if some other people are interested in knowing their ancestry DNA or their ancestry background. And we are also going to look at topics like Ancestry verse 23 and Me, Native American DNA result. Is ancestry DNA result testing accurate? Those questions are to be answered only in this broadcast. And we are also going to look at why so many African Americans are interested in their African ancestry. It's really interesting to know why others things they have to trace out and know where they are coming from, why others doesn't. We're all going to see that happens as we move on. Now, let's see what happens as we are moving here. We are going to start with